Aloha, everyone, and welcome to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle. I'd like to welcome all of you and to today's conversation, which has to do with the idea of the razor's edge. And I think that applies in terms of our overall theme for the year of citizens of the future, of knowing that this isn't going to be an easy, flat path that we tread into the future. It's really going to be one that is going to require a lot of balance on our part. And there will be times when we may slip off and we're going to have to climb back on. We have someone that is actually new to Still and Moving Center. He's an accomplished acupuncturist from the Japanese acupuncture tradition. And his name is Bret Shimizu. He's a mover. He's a former soccer player. He's also someone who has engaged in Zen meditation practices and other Zen meditation practices at Chozenji in Kalihi Valley here on Oahu. And so he really brings with him a depth of experience, insight, and I would say knowledge into the conversation that we're going to have today. So, Bret, we hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Renee. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming, for being here. It's nice to meet you. And yeah, so my background is in acupuncture. I lived in Kona for 5 years, and I trained under a Japanese acupuncturist there, and then moved here a year ago to begin my practice. So I have a private practice, and then recently I started working with the Still and Moving Center to offer acupuncture to their members and other people interested in the community. So I'm kind of getting used to the different formats and offerings. And so Renee asked me to speak on the razor's edge. We thought that this topic might be relevant for Oriental medicine. And so I'm going to try my best to make this hopefully engaging and interesting. And I was just talking to Renee before everybody got on, and I was saying, the razor's edge was a little bit of it was kind of challenging for me to find a way to integrate it in a way that that kind of made sense in my mind. And I think part of what she said was true, where if you look at the yin and yang symbol, we can look at it real quick. She was saying there's an edge, on this in terms of, but it's curved. And so she was describing how in her experience with Tai Chi, how there's kind of this movement between yin and yang. But there's kind of a fluidity to it in the way that this image shows. And I think that was a little bit of my struggle. So it was interesting to hear her kind of lay it out so clearly in that the razor's edge kind of, I'm visualizing something metallic and very sharp, and fixed in a way. And I think that's like the edge. When I hear those words, that's the image that comes to mind. And I think I'll go into this in the presentation, but I think there's my kind of experience with Oriental medicine is much more that edge is very fluid, and almost even there's no real edge there. It's like it shifts and changes, and something that is yin becomes yang in a different context. And so that's a little bit of what I try to kind of explore in this, is that the different ways that the razor's edge could be seen. So I'll get to that. So if anybody has any questions or anything, feel free to chime in. So I just wanted to start. I do have a background in mindfulness meditation and Zen meditation, and it's something that is very important to me and has been very valuable. So I just wanted to start with a little bit of a breathing. I'll just call it breathing, but you can do meditation if you'd like. And so I'll lead this for just a minute or two. So if you feel comfortable, you can just bring your attention inward and close your eyes, and then check your posture. And you can imagine trying to straighten your spine. And one way to do that would be to imagine that you have a hook on the top of your head, and you're trying to hook onto the ceiling or the sky, bringing your spine erect. And we want to do this in a relaxed but attentive way, not forceful. And so now that we have our spine straight, let's just bring our attention to our breath. And as you check in, let's inhale. And as we inhale, let's imagine inhaling to our belly. So down into our belly, letting our belly expand. And then a long, slow exhalation, or whatever's comfortable for you. So exhale. And then just relax and inhale. I tend to do nostril breathing for both, but do whatever's comfortable. Relax, inhale, let our belly expand. And then a long, slow exhalation. And let's just do this for a few more breaths, trying to keep our attention on our breath. And if our mind wanders, we can just acknowledge that and then gently bring it back to our breathing. Okay. Now, when you're ready, you can just open your eyes and we'll begin the rest of the presentation. So thank you very much. Okay, so this is the quote on the razor's edge. And this is on the razor's edge path, everything is finely balanced and highly energized. And I think for, as I said, kind of as I was exploring what this meant in relation to Oriental medicine, I think the kind of finely balanced and highly energized aspect of it felt very true, that for Oriental medicine specifically, or if I think of human bodies or nature, there's a kind of balance in nature, there's a balance in the body that's inherent to the body. And that system is highly energized in its natural state. And then disease process could be kind of an imbalance or, lack of energy or some distortion from that kind of natural fluid process. So that element kind of rang true. And then I kind of was thinking, what is a razor's edge path in Oriental medicine? Or what does that mean? How do I evoke that? So as I explored that, I realized that I had two perspectives. And then this image, the actual symbol, was something that Renée mentioned and we thought was appropriate to kind of bring into the presentation. And it fits really well here. And so there were kind of two perspectives that I had, and I'll go into. One was more of an action oriented. So if you read the quotes actually in the book for each day, I just noted like what it was saying, and they're very action oriented. So for example, like, if you don't place your foot on the rope, you'll never cross the chasm. Life is a risk. Change and chance are constants. So there's kind of this sense that they're motivating you or calling you to like be courageous or to step up in some way that might be uncomfortable. And that process is very useful in a certain context. Like, Queen Liliuokalani, she's trying to run a kingdom, and she's saying that if she does it too lax or too rigid, it doesn't work. Basically, it fails. So she had to navigate what is a difficult situation. And I think that in that way, the razor's edge is a very appropriate image in the sense of kind of that needing to be optimizing performance in a way, and attention, and really trying to find the best path forward when there's a lot at stake. And then I think there's a second perspective. So I'll go into this. I kind of wanted to go into the symbol a little bit. So what's interesting about this symbol is that, the dots, and I didn't really know this maybe till that recently, but the dots represent that the yin and the yang are always inside of each other. So I think the white tends to be yang, which is, you could think of like sun energy, heavenly energy, light, and then yin tends to be darkness, tends to be more kind of hidden, thick, viscous, nighttime. And so, but then the dots represent that actually those are always interrelated, and one always contains the other. So as soon as you reach the peak of yang, you're already entering yin. And you see this throughout the day, you see this throughout the cycles of the season. And I'll go into this a little bit later in the presentation. So I think these two perspectives maybe fit into that, but I didn't really have time to kind of integrate that. So we'll see how that comes up later. So this is the action-oriented perspective. And so, we have some mountain climbers, and there's a seriousness here. You could fall off and die, so there's a way in which I think this kind of perspective is helpful. And it requires all these things. So you're optimally performing, you're taking risks, you're willing to fail, but you're also growing through that process, even through failure. And then there's a kind of a sensitivity, adaptability, and a presence. But it kind of what I saw inherent in all these kind of action-oriented perspectives was there's a kind of an implication of an actor or a self, like someone who's doing it and is responsible and is trying to navigate a difficult situation. So the second perspective was what I called being oriented. And so this case, you have a path and there's nobody on there. And to me, this feels a little bit more what I felt related to Oriental medicine, in that if you've ever done Qigong or Tai Chi, they often tell you to take a form, a posture, but they tell you to be active. So it takes strength, but they also tell you to be relaxed. And so when you first hear that kind of concept, to be active but relaxed, it's kind of, I feel like it's very like you try to be active and then you realize you're stiff, and then you relax and you realize you're slacking. And so you're trying to navigate like how to find a position that's relaxed but also engaged and active. And I think to me that's really what Oriental medicine is trying to get at. So it's not so much like a sheer cliff or a kind of metallic coldness. There's more of this sense of fluidity and presence and softness. So it's like maybe like softness and hardness together. And it sounds like a paradox, but in reality, those do exist. And I think you're like, maybe the other one feels a little bit more like fear-based. It doesn't have to be, but it's kind of like, oh, I can't fail, I have to succeed. But maybe this one's more inspiration-based or creative, in that sense of like, I'm going towards what I love, or I'm doing something that's inspiring me. So I'm engaged and I'm highly attuned, but I'm not necessarily under stress. I don't feel stress, and so I think in both cases, you have an appropriate response, and they're both appropriate perspectives. But I guess for me, this felt a little bit closer to Oriental medicine, and maybe the more kind of spiritual component, which was, what I thought was, is the optimal way of walking the razor's edge to not be self-identified, to kind of be like the whole limitations of self actually get in the way of me being fully present and available to adapt accordingly to that situation. And so then I think these are the questions, can optimal walking lack a doer? And who is it that's walking the razor's edge? So rather than focused on my goal and all these things, but like pointing the kind of inquiry back into myself, like, who am I? What am I? Like, where am I walking? Why am I even walking there? And why am I under stress? Is this important? And so that's kind of a totally, that's more of a spiritual inquiry. And then I'm trying to draw this back into the topic, which is Oriental medicine, which is that I think Oriental medicine, at its root, it started with Taoism. And then it kind of evolved into a medical practice out of what was shamanism mostly. And in this, what you find is that there's this sense of self, or this sense of, to me, my understanding is there's an orientation around health that's very much basically in attunement with nature and your environment. So there's very much the sense that you're not separate. Actually, you're intimately connected in a very direct way with your external environment. And I think inherent in that is this perspective of there's not like a fixed sense of self, or there's not necessarily a doer in maybe kind of a fixed way. And that lends itself to this idea that being able to be fluid and active and engaged, but relaxed at the same time, is kind of the optimal state to maintain optimal health. So in this image, you see this person, and I said, living in harmony with natural cycles is the key to health. So basically, what if you read like the classics of Oriental medicine, and that's the quote that I sent to you was from that. They describe kind of how the universe works, like how nature works, how the seasons moved. And then they would say, during different seasons, different organ systems are more easily affected to injury. Or because of this happening during the season, it's hot, you'll see these types of diseases. So you need to counteract that with your diet or with your movement. And so I think what they did is they kind of saw there are these natural cycles. There's day and night. There's the monthly. There's the lunar cycle. There's the yearly solar cycle. And within that, there's all these changes. And the way for me to be optimally healthy in that environment, both physically, but also emotionally and spiritually, was to understand those patterns and then to adapt my behavior according to that pattern. And so if you look at this image, you can see this person has their arms out, and you can see the rain's coming down, the sun's coming down, they're standing on the earth. And it's very much this sense that the human body is a microcosm of the macrocosmic universe. So everything that's inside of a human, like this is how they think. The human body is a reflection of the universe. And so everything that's happening in the external environment is happening internally. And those same disease patterns that you'd see, like maybe the last month, it's been really hot and humid. For me, I felt, you would see that same pattern arise in the body. And so then you have to adapt your behavior, whether that's your diet, your sleeping, your activity, to kind of counteract and balance and have your system go into balance. So, and the way that they did that was this concept of the meridians or channels. So I'm calling them channels, but they're basically, if anybody's gone to an acupuncturist, they might talk about that. But this is how your body is connected to the external environment. And I'll show you what a channel is. So in this case, you could think of it like a river of energy. And there's traditionally 12 channels, and each of those channels is connected to an internal organ. So in this case, you have the kidney channel. So the kidney channel, it's on the external part of the body. And so the way that acupuncture works is by stimulating the external part of the body, you actually can affect the internal organs, you can affect the internal system. And all these meridians or channels are connected to other channels and other organs in different ways. So the idea is that the body can go out of balance, and then we can stimulate the meridian system to basically bring that body back into balance. So in this passage, this is basically describing this current time, which is that this is the 3 months of autumn, of fall, and it's saying that basically it starts to cool. So you have summertime, it's starting to cool, and then because of that, you have more wind. You see there was more, especially like on the mainland, you'll see this a lot, the wind, the coolness, the freezing temperatures. And then it's telling you kind of how to change your lifestyle. So one should retire with the sunset or rise with the dawn. Just as the weather turns harsh, so does the emotional climate. So they're saying, be aware that you might have a stir of emotions, and that's because the way that the environment is changing. And so you really want to keep in mind to try and remain calm and peaceful. And this time of the year, the fall, is the time of the lung. So the lung is most susceptible to disease during the fall. And so you want to do exercises and refrain from activities like smoking, it's saying, to avoid injuring the lung. And the emotion of the lung is grief or sadness. So they basically kind of correlated all these things that maybe seem totally separate, and they correlated them according to different times of year. And then they saw how disease patterns arise and interconnected. And then, yeah, again, you would kind of adapt appropriately. So this is an example of kind of this yearly cycle. And so this is called the 5-element theory. And so in the case where we are, the lungs, the bottom right, the lungs is metal. And this is fall, and it's the color white, and it's associated with the climate of dryness. So these are all the factors of this time of year. So these are the things that will be affected. And then just as we see seasons, the next season is winter, and the kidneys are associated with winter, and they're associated with the color black. And it's a time of storage. So what that passage is saying is if we don't take care of ourselves in the fall, we'll injure our lungs. And if you injure your lung, that actually affects your kidneys. It says that in the passage. It affects your kidneys. And if your kidneys are affected, you can't properly store for the winter time, which is the time of storage. So then you don't have enough energy for spring. And so basically you see that the way the disease process happens. And so as a practitioner, we're looking at this and we're saying, this is like a circle. As you look at this as a circle, but you could imagine, you know, an out of balance system might be more like a triangle, where like you have the metal element as the point, you know, and it's taking up a large section of this circle and it's kind of become out of balance. And so, you know, you're kind of looking and thinking, how can I bring that back into balance? And then there's different ways to do that. So just, there's a lot to go into. I didn't realize it was going to take so long. So then the cycle, you see the arrows are going one direction, just like the seasons. It's called the generating cycle. So, and they also brought in the concept of family dynamics. So in this case, the lung element is the mother element to the water element, or the metal element is the mother element to the water element. So in the case where you had deficient water, like if you had deficient kidneys in the wintertime, or just in general, even just today, you would tonify the metal element, because the metal is the mother. So the mother, this is the theory, the mother, if the mother's healthy, the baby will be healthy. She'll be able to properly take care of the baby. But if the mother's not healthy, no matter what you do to the child, the baby won't be healthy because the mother is sick. So there's these ways in which they kind of thought about like family processes, weather patterns, all these really interesting things, and they correlated and they created a system around how to balance those things. So that's one way in which like I would look at a person's, you know, disease pattern and then decide how to treat that by saying like, oh, and I don't go strictly according to this way, but this is very true to Japanese acupuncture theory. They use the 5-element theory pretty as the core kind of overarching theory over the meridian system of how they use the meridians. So to kind of conclude here, I would just say, you know, Oriental medicine is very much about being relaxed. And I think when you're in a state of relax, when you're doing something you enjoy, you can feel that sense of well-being. And in that, you might be doing activity. It might be a sport. It might be an instrument. It could be dancing. It could be any number of things, but you feel energized and you feel in balance. You feel happy. And from a Western standpoint, the way I think is like, then that means you have optimal blood flow. Your body's optimally functioning. So therefore you naturally will be healthy. And so I think that's kind of it's not the razor's edge necessarily, but that's kind of the orientation and perspective that I think Oriental medicine is trying to say, is that you want to be a highly energized, balanced, attentive, and relaxed and joyful, you know, but not overly joyful or overly sad. All the emotions are appropriate in their appropriate time. And when they become out of balance, then it becomes like this thing that's taking up too much energy. So, and then I think the key to that is living in harmony with the natural cycles. So there's natural cycles, and paying attention and understanding them is a way in which we can harmonize. And I think the root of that understanding is that you are not separate from your environment. So there's like this lack of needing to, like, just because I can stay up all night and eat junk food and, you know, watch Netflix all night doesn't mean that that's like very, like, nature's not doing that. If you observe it, that's not really like a natural thing. The sun is like shining through your computer, but it's nighttime outside, and, you know, you're caffeinated from Red Bull or whatever it is. Like, so there's a lot of, if you sort of pick apart the way in which that's totally disassociated from nature, I think that's kind of what they're pointing at, is that, and then a lot of that comes from desire. I want to do this, as opposed to saying like, what is actually in harmony with what's happening around me? And then how do I orient myself to kind of be in harmony with that? And I think that that's really what I see Oriental medicine is doing. And there's a real beauty in that for me. So I'll end it there. There's a quote by Zhuangzi, which if you're ever into Zhuangzi, he's amazing, but we won't go into it, but I'll leave it up. So.
Well, maybe it'll become relevant as we have our conversation. Maybe you'll want to pull it forward. I was really fascinated by the idea that we can't ever, we can't ever actually stay exactly on the razor's edge. That we're always, like, with every step we take, we're just a little bit this way and a little bit that way. I mean, even if we're walking on a tightrope, we're always going to be slightly balanced one way, slightly balanced the other way with every step that we take. And the same thing when we move, as Bret and I were talking about in the beginning, if we're doing Tai Chi, as soon as Yang begins to take over in part of the body, we've got Yin going on in another part of the body. And so the balance is always shifting back and forth. If they ever do become completely even and static, that is no movement. And so that's actually kind of not even alive. That's just a stillness that is not engaged in the living of a life in motion. And so something about traveling along this razor's edge in a balanced way implies life itself. If it's absolutely static, completely balanced, from my understanding, the two-footed stance in Tai Chi that's completely balanced is like we're not even in life yet. We're in more the unmanifest. And as soon as we get into the manifest world of life, then we've got the opposites that we're always having to deal with. So I think that it's something like that that has to do with this razor's edge, is how do we navigate the opposites? Perhaps that's it. How do we navigate the opposites? And so it'd be interesting to see what folks have to say in regard to your personal experience of navigating the opposites, which might be that razor's edge. And that's open to everybody. That's not a direct question to Bret. That's for all of us to consider.
It's the Goldilocks story.
Yeah.
Papa Bear's bed was way too hard, and Mama Bear's bed was way too soft. Yeah, it's that middle path.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about a razor as opposed to a blunt piece of steel. That as you get more and more refined, that it gets sharper and sharper. It gets more and more effective. So that perfect balance is when those iterations get more and more refined. The edge gets sharper and sharper and sharper. Yeah, there's so many metaphors around this idea of balance. Love them all.
Yeah. Thank you, David.
I was Brene Brown's book on the anatomy of the heart that Malia introduced me to, and she's talking about the zone of optimal confusion. And this notion of a zone, I think, is very appropriate to this conversation. There is too much and there is too little, and it's what we do in our yin yoga practice is push the edge just enough to feel, not too much, not too little. And I think that probably Chinese medicine has that same idea of bringing things that are too much down and things that are not enough up to that edge.
Bret, do you want to enter in there? Is that it? Related to Oriental medicine that way? It's not too much, not too little.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely yeah, I mean, I think that's you're trying to find the harmony or the balance. Like there's an inherent balance in the body, and then you're trying to navigate that. And I like the idea of, I hadn't really thought of it that way. Like really, my mind was really fixated on somehow trying to, like the razor edge was a difficult concept in relation to Oriental medicine from my perspective. But the idea that, it's more of a refinement, like the kind of navigating that is this refinement to where the edge that you come to is like this kind of precision through experience, and then that's allowing you to kind of be as skillful as possible.
Yeah, like the difference between one of your acupuncture needles and a sharp stick. Refinement is key. Love the presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Bret.
Melody, what do you do to navigate the opposites?
Yeah, I really appreciate thinking about balance. I feel like in so many things that I do, I'm always thinking about that balance. And I really appreciated the bringing in the yin and yang symbol. And, I'm with you, Bret, of being challenged of thinking about the razor's edge in this, but seeing that edge sort of helped with that process for me. I'm really jazzed about you bringing in the connection to us and the environment, because the environment is very important to me. And I feel like a lot of the problems that we face today is that people have lost that connection and realizing the connection to the environment. I think it's something else you talked about is, you could be forcing yourself to stay up late with your Red Bull or whatever it is, and artificially play whatever you're doing, playing video games, whatever, locked inside a building all day long and just losing that connection with our natural environment that really is all about balance and staying in balance of what our resources are and not overdoing that. And it just, to me, it crosses through all these. It's a thread that comes through everything, whether it's ourselves and our own behaviors, or what's going on with the environment and our consumption and that. So that to me is yet another balance. So I think about balance a lot in my life, in everything that I do. So I really appreciated those elements, and thanks so much, Bret, for your talk tonight.
And you do live a balanced life from everything that I can see, Melody. Thanks for that.
Thank you. I try.
Adela, how do you navigate the opposites?
I don't think I should say anything, because when Bret said about staying up all night watching Netflix, it just sounded so good, I'm always feeling just off and just getting on that edge. I'm off the edge. I mean, I'm trying to get on the edge all the time, I'm not in touch with nature that much. I just look at it from the outside, and still and moving is my nature. Dancing hula, when she talks about, nature, that's my nature. It's like I get nature secondhand. But I do take Tai Chi. I do take Qigong, but it's online, So I don't know, maybe I'm already different, it's an unbalanced life, but I'm seeking that balance. So maybe I'll come and see you, Bret.
I think you've got more balances than you realize, and there are lots of different balances, like the balance between stillness and movement, right? And so you're doing some of these practices, like us sitting and conversing with one another, or a meditation practice, and then you balance that by the various movement practices that you do too. So sounds to me as if you've got a lot of balances going.
Can I just comment on that a little bit, if that's okay?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate what you said. And I guess, yeah, I didn't mean for that to be prescriptive. I think it can come across that way. Like, when you start studying, you're like, oh, I have to do this. It's this time of year and I got to do that, take that herb. And, and I think that that's kind of the part of the razor's edge, like that kind of very self-initiated process that I was trying to kind of say is maybe unhealthy, even if you mean it to be well, even if it's meant to be balanced according to the classics. It could be a very unbalanced way because you're so fixated on all the things I have to do to stay in balance. So I think that, I guess, more of what I was trying to emphasize was like finding your own authentic way of living that feels harmonious and balanced to you is the most important thing. And I don't think that it's wrong to do any of those things. Stay up and drink Red Bull and watch Netflix. I don't think it's wrong, but I think if you're doing that and you're not healthy or happy, then maybe you can look around and be like, oh, maybe there's other ways to live that are helpful, you know, or kind of just seeing that non-separation. But I don't want it to seem like I think that's bad even, or whatever, you know, as long as you're doing what makes you happy, I think that that's most important. So
I appreciate that so much. I used to study macrobiotics and, try to eat, it is the lung season. And now I forgot, well, what am I supposed to be eating? Now I sort of eat whatever I can find in the fridge. And anyway, I appreciate what you said about an authentic way of living, because everybody has their own balances. And I am seeking mine, I guess, at this late age. And it's not that easy, even if, I know so little, but I'm learning about my body through still and moving. And yeah, I guess everything is sort of falling and in and out of place. So yeah, thank you.
Adela, this is where you plug the yin class on Sunday mornings.
Yes, in yoga, man, it's a flow, and I can't do a lot of the things that David does, but heck, I just do downward dog, or I skip a whole sequence, but it's good for me. I do what I can do actually in your class, and it's very good for me. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Adela.
Hello, everybody. Usually, my name is Olivia. I run the social media for Still and Moving Center, and I'm doing virtual support. So usually I just listen in, but I really enjoyed your presentation, Bret, and I have been going to a regular acupuncturist. Well, I've been a regular at my acupuncturist for the past few years, having survived COVID 3 times. And this time last year, I was dealing with pneumonia. So it really hit home to me when you were talking about the grief connection and the lungs. And so I was wondering if you could talk more about that. And and I loved how you talked about it in a cycle in connection with the other elements. And maybe if you could also talk about what it means to break the cycle and how that can be done.
that's a very good question. I feel like maybe I need to understand a little bit more about what's going on to give an appropriate answer. And I want to give other people a space to talk. So in the space that we have. So I guess I'm happy to talk to you separately about kind of more, maybe, because I feel like what I hear you're saying is like, this is maybe my lungs or something that I can do to kind of support myself, to kind of have stronger lung during this time of year, or to kind of keep my body healthy. So I'm happy to talk to you more about that if you want to talk about that. But what I understand is you're asking me, what can you do specifically for your lung to strengthen your lungs? Is that correct? Or
Well, sure. I think more so in regards to your cycle, it seemed like maybe there was an action in order to, I guess, I don't know if it's breaking the cycle or enriching the cycle.
Yeah. I think part of it would be maybe, it's I guess it's a little bit, I think part of it is understanding what the imbalance is. So in the case where like, if we talked and I was like, oh, you're having all these lung issues, then I might say, okay, grief, like maybe that's an emotional event, right? Maybe that's tied to an actual thing, or maybe you're prone to that emotion, or, and then what other physical symptoms do you have? So by correlating those things, I could have a sense of maybe, what is the cause of that? And then I think there are things you can do. So like there are Qigong exercises, for example, that you can do to strengthen your lung qi, right? Or maybe it's not your lung. So I would feel your pulse. So like that's the classic way. And I'm not a pulse expert, but that is a classic way. I would feel your pulse in Japanese acupuncture, and I would find out, okay, what's the weakest pulse? So there's 6 pulses, and they indicate all the different internal organs. And so then we could be like, oh, it's actually, you have lung problems, but actually it's because your spleen's weak. So maybe you have a weak digestive process. So the spleen is the time of year that goes before the generating cycle of the lung. And so then I would ask, like, how do you eat? Like, what do you eat? Like, and what did you eat growing up? All these types of things to understand what your digestion is. And that might be the root of why you have weak lungs, because that's the mother of the lung, right? Or it could be some other cause. So I want to give you an answer, but I also want to do it maybe thoroughly. And so I'm not sure exactly how to do that right now in the context of
Sure, that's okay. No, I'm definitely not. I'd love to talk to you after this, and I will definitely reach out. But I don't expect you to have a solution or anything for me right now. It was, but more so about a cycle. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, the
Yeah.
interconnectedness.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. You can kind of, I would say it's not break, the cycle is the natural pattern. And it's more about, you can imagine it was a perfect circle, like the image was a perfect, and if you looked, it actually was the yin and yang symbol behind it, if you look at the image again. But then what would happen is, like, maybe it'd become distorted. So like if it was like lung energy, it might start to become oblong or like a triangle, like I was saying, right? So the lung is now, it's not a circle. So that means the energy is not flowing. There's corners, there's ways, and there's edges. Like part of the element of the lung is taking up a disproportionate amount of that circle. And now it's becoming kind of disordered. So then there is a way to basically, so I think of it, instead of breaking, it's more like bringing that energy back into harmony with the other elements. So then it comes back into, and again, the razor's edge is the circle. So you're never, like, it's never a perfect circle. And that's not the point. But the point is that you can engage in that process in a way that kind of constantly brings you back to this center, rather than like becoming further. Because basically the separation of yin and yang is death. That is the concept, is when you have that symbol, but when the black and the white are no longer connected, that is basically dying. So as it gets more distorted, you become closer disease and then death. So the goal is always to try and bring it back in, however you do that, basically. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd like to recommend the pause button that I found. I happen to, I played sports very intensely when I was in high school and all, and it seems like much of my life is moving about. So I have found it necessary, not just to slow down, but to maybe 3 or 4 times a day, just depends, to just sit still and then don't think about what you need to do, and maybe put your feet up a bit, and always have a glass of water nearby, but spend half an hour pausing, and then you can, it's magic, and then you can pick up something to read for a little bit, and then you can go back to doing this and doing that. So I just find it it's probably my way of getting balance, but the important thing is to just to pause completely. And then if you want to do your arm exercises or something like that, you do it from a point of view really of strength, because your system is all calmed down. Anyway, that's just my thought.
Seems like one we can all probably incorporate a little bit more into our daily lives. I don't see anyone here that doesn't manage to fit a lot into every day.
Mm-hmm.
So finding the gap and giving the pause seems like a great suggestion. I'm still a little bit interested in the refinement that David was bringing up. I know in terms of like thinking of that hard, sharp edge that you were originally thinking of, Bret. like a sword's edge. The Japanese craftsmen hone that sword's edge by putting it through fire, and so that it becomes not just sharper but much stronger too. And then you also mentioned precision, kind of a clear definition. And I'm wondering if something about that isn't still helpful for us to think about. Like if we're trying to live a more balanced life and we're very out of balance, we're going to go from maybe eating really irregularly to then maybe we eat too much and then we eat too little, and it's just very back and forth, great big swings. And then as we get more balanced, it seems like we're coming closer to center. So when we go one way or the other, we don't go very far. It's a much closer balance that we're keeping, and we're not so much flip-flopping back and forth. And when Queen Liliuokalani is thinking about how to lead her kingdom, and she's talking about, not holding too harsh of a stance, but on the other hand, not being too lenient. A really good leader isn't going back and forth between these, off with their heads and then, anything goes. They're getting much, much closer to, being maybe a little too critical and then being a little bit too lenient. They've got a lot less wiggle room between those two sides. And I wonder if that helps us to understand more of this navigating of the opposites and how the razor's edge might be helpful in that way. Maybe, Bret, maybe you have some thoughts about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious what other people think about that. It does make, I guess what comes up for me, and I didn't think of it that way, but yeah, there is this. So if you think of it as like a skill that you're honing, and then like Manjushri is the bodhisattva of wisdom in kind of the Buddhist tradition, and he's supposed to have a sword, the sword of wisdom, and he cuts through delusion, basically, or ignorance. He cuts through anything that is unhelpful or causes suffering. And so that's kind of the image I have, where there is something very helpful about that, and there's something very active, but it has a warrior quality. It's not always like Avalokiteshvara is like a very different image, like 1,000 hands that are with compassion are willing to help you. And so maybe it is like that perspective or that orientation of like refining that to be. I feel like its presence is really what I hear when I hear that. It's like being present with what's there and paying attention, and then acting accordingly, like appropriate response. So, and I think to get to that place, where you're not like, trying to cut the steak with like a branch or something like that, obviously that's going to make a mess. So that's not like a good thing. So so you want to have a knife to cut sharply, when you're trying to use it as a tool. And then I think but that's like the appropriate tool, but like a sword's not an appropriate tool if, is a sword an appropriate tool if I'm trying to figure out why I have this problem, why I have back pain, I don't know, maybe it is, maybe I need to get surgery or something, so it's like you want a sharp scalpel, but then at the same time, maybe it's not so I need to do everything so sharply or so I guess I'm still exploring it, and it's not really clear to me, but that's what comes up. So
I was thinking of this way of honing closer to the center, and that being like being able to walk the razor's edge, so we're not falling so far off all the time, those different sides, but just coming very close to that center line. one of the things that I remember being said about a master or mastery is that it's not that the master doesn't fall off, it's just that he or she can get back on more quickly and more easily because they haven't gone very far off, right? Or and I probably heard that in the context of learning to become a Nia teacher and being told, you know, if you want to become a teacher, you've got to be willing to kind of stink. Like you're just not going to get it right. You're always going to have, you know, you're always going to fail in certain ways, and you have to just take that as a given, and then get back on. And so as you're progressing as a teacher, you're going to keep stinking in different circumstances, but you don't stink as much. And it's not as obvious to your students, you know, they don't feel like totally let down. They barely notice a little bobble. So it's more of that honing closer, not falling as far off.
Well, I really like what you said, Renee, because, well, you really can't be afraid of falling, because if you're afraid of falling, then you're lost. So
Yeah.
then if you fall, it doesn't matter. But some people don't know that, you know,
Right.
you know, the teachers are always trying their best, but then, you know, everybody's their own planet, their own world. So things that bother some students, I mean, you know, it's a wide range. I mean, you know, how we were brought up and everything. So I really like what you said. And I guess that's the way it is, you know. Thank you for continuing to teach, because I would never want that role.
Just hopefully a little less stinky every time. I'd love to tell you about next week while somebody maybe prepares themselves a little bit to give a vote of thanks to Bret for being with us today. What we've got going next week is something Still Moving Center has been preparing. Well, actually, we've I would say spent the last 12 and a half years preparing for it, because every time we do a celebration of Diwali, we do a presentation of the Indian epic, the Ramayana, which is the basis of this celebration of light. And we are doing one of these celebrations on next Sunday, which is not Saturday. We're doing it on next Sunday, November 12th. And we've really got such a wonderful cast and crew that are going to be putting this together. It's a very swashbuckling tale, and it's also very meaningful. And it's going to, I think, be thrilling to watch. I was thinking you had to come and see it in person until the last day or two. We've figured out a way to actually get it online. So those of you who are not here in person, you're still going to be able to watch it. And so instead of having Gems Saturday next week, which is when we'll be in dress rehearsal mode, we'll call our Gems period attending this the celebration of light called Diwali. And it will be now offered, I can happily say, on Zoom, and it will be at 6 p.m. next week. Given the time change that's going to happen, if you're on the West Coast, that will be only 8 p.m. for you instead of 9 p.m. So you should be able to sign up for it now, both online, in which case you could come an hour early and we'll have samosas and lassi and hot chai tea. Or you can sign up and join us online. So that's what's going on for GEMS next week. And then we'll be back the following week to our normal Saturday at 3 p.m. Schedule. Once again, if you're on the West Coast, now we've only got a 2-hour gap as of tomorrow when the time changes. So that'll be on Saturdays at 5 p.m. through the winter. Yeah. So is there anybody now who would like to give a vote of thanks to Bret?
I will.
Wonderful. Thank you, Adele.
Thank you, Bret, for your wonderful presentation and preparation. I really appreciate that. I have background in what you were talking about, so I could relate to it. And it reminded me of my past, so maybe my past can come back in a more fruitful way. And yeah, thank you for being so young and wise. Thank you. Appreciate you. And I might see you. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bret,
Wonderful.
I would also like to acknowledge Bret because I'm sure he was thrown into the chaos of this moments before it happened. And I love how Renee has this structure to this program. And then there's the chaos of, we've got a topic, and then we throw this point of view, and then somebody's ideas and opinions, and it's this balance of chaos and order that come together beautifully every week. So thank you for being a part of it, Bret.
And doing so well. We're so happy to have you part of our Ohana, part of our community.
Thank you for joining and for all your thoughts. And yeah, I really appreciate it. And looking forward to meeting all of you in person if I haven't met you yet.
Yeah. Looking
Yeah.
forward to getting poked.
Aloha.
Thank
all.
you. Aloha. Bye-bye.
Bye. Aloha.